Nolan Arkwell was a respected surgeon, Serena a beloved florist, and their children, Junior and Bram, the heart of their quiet suburban home. But when Valeska Dawn stepped into their lives, everything they thought was safe, sacred, and whole began to unravel. Within weeks, a deadly affair spiraled into manipulation, madness, and murder, ending in a brutal family tragedy that left a town in shock and a killer still at large. The Arkwell family was the kind of family people admired from afar. Neighbors often said they were the perfect family on the hill. Their house sat peacefully at the end of a cul-de-sac in the quiet suburb of Wexley Heights, wrapped in a white picket fence and blooming hydrangeas. Dr. Nolan Arkwell, the father, was a respected pediatric surgeon at Wexley Medical Center. He was known for his calm manner, his generous donations to local charities, and his spotless white coat that children somehow found comforting. His wife, Serena Arkwell, was a florist. She ran Petal and Root, a cheerful little flower shop, near the town square that was always filled with soft music and the scent of lilies and lavender. Together they had 2 children, Junior, a quiet and creative 14-year-old with a love for painting, and Bram, an energetic 11-year-old who loved science and never missed a soccer practice. To the outside world, their life seemed picture-perfect. Family portraits lined the mantel in their living room. Holiday cards were sent out like clockwork, and backyard barbecues were held every summer with neighbors praising Serena's grilled peaches. Every Sunday, they attended church. Every school, function, Nolan was front row smiling. It was the kind of life most people dream about, but like many dreamlike lives, it was also fragile, and it was hiding something dangerous. Nolan Arkwell had a secret. For the past 10 months, he had been having an affair with a woman named Valeska Dawn. She was striking, mysterious, and worked as a technician in the hospital's pathology lab. Valeska was younger, far less conventional than Serena, and fascinated by Nolan's professional success. The affair had begun quietly, with coffee breaks and hallway glances, then escalated into weekend escapes and hotel rooms booked under fake names. Nolan had always convinced himself it was harmless. He was still a father, still a husband. Nothing in his daily routine had changed, on the surface. But as the months went by, Valeska began to want more, and Nolan began to care less about hiding. He started coming home later, making up stories about emergency surgeries or patient crises. He was easily irritated, especially with Serena's questions. He started forgetting small things: Bram's parent-teacher meeting, Junior's school art show. Serena noticed, but didn't say anything at first. She thought it was just stress. Doctors had busy lives, but in her heart, she felt the distance growing. Their once tender marriage had grown cold. Nolan rarely touched her now. The late night talks had ended. Even their dinner conversations had become quiet and awkward. Valeska, meanwhile, was growing possessive. She started showing up uninvited at the hospital parking lot, sending cryptic messages to Nolan during his shifts. Her tone became demanding. She didn't want to be the other woman anymore. She wanted a future. She wanted Nolan to leave his family. And though he didn't say it out loud, a part of him started imagining what that future might look like. A simpler life, no wife, no kids, no responsibilities. Just Valeska, but Nolan underestimated how fast things can spiral when someone feels cornered. As Valeska pushed harder, Nolan grew careless, and Serena, who had been ignoring her suspicions, found the first clue by accident: an unfamiliar earring in Nolan's car. It was small, gold, and definitely not hers. She didn't confront him right away, but the seed of doubt had been planted. She started watching more closely, checking his phone when he left it unattended, noticing how often he stepped outside to take hospital calls. She even followed him once, just far enough to see him pull into a hotel parking lot. Still, she kept it to herself. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding, but deep inside she knew. And she wasn't the only one noticing something was off. Junior had started journaling about the strange tension in the house. Bram had become clingier, asking his mother daily if Daddy was mad at her. The perfect family was unraveling, quietly, invisibly, and no one could have imagined how violently that unraveling would end. Valeska Dorn was not someone easily forgotten. With sharp green eyes and a voice that was both soothing and unsettling, she had a way of making people feel like they were being studied. She wasn't from Wexley Heights, and no one knew much about her. She had arrived in town a year earlier, taking a job as a lab technician at the hospital, working late shifts and keeping mostly to herself. Her colleagues thought she was odd, but smart. Nolan, though, saw something else in her, an escape. What began as flirtation during late-night shifts had turned into something more dangerous. Valeska wasn't just a woman he was sleeping with. She became an obsession. For Nolan, it started as a thrill. He was used to being in control, at the hospital, at home, in public. But with Valeska, he lost that control and liked it. She was unpredictable, intense, and didn't care about his reputation or his title. She challenged him, made him feel younger, more alive. But it wasn't long before her intensity shifted from seductive to suffocating. Valeska wanted more. She wanted Nolan to leave Serena, to leave the children and start over with her. She began planning, as if their new life was already a fact. She found houses online, showed him photos of towns they could move to. She picked out new names for them, joking that they'd need a fresh start somewhere far from the plastic world of Wexley Heights. At first, Nolan laughed along, but her ideas grew darker. She talked about how families were just cages, how children didn't need to be part of their new life, how Serena would get in the way. Nolan dismissed her words as fantasy. But Valeska wasn't fantasizing, she was calculating, and she was growing impatient. That's when the letters started. Serena received the first one on a Wednesday. No name, just a typed note saying, "He's not who you think he is." She thought it was a prank, but then came another, this one, with photos, blurry but unmistakable, Nolan and Valeska leaving a hotel. Serena felt her stomach turn. The calm routine of her life shattered. She didn't show the children. She didn't tell Nolan. Instead, she hired a private investigator, something she never imagined herself doing. Within a week, she had confirmation of the affair. The investigator provided a small folder of images, timestamps, and places Nolan had been. Serena's heart broke, but something inside her also hardened. She began recording her conversations with Nolan, keeping a journal, locking up her important documents. She even had new locks installed on the back door. Nolan noticed the changes, but said nothing. He seemed more distracted than ever, leaving, for long walks with no explanation, disappearing into his study for hours. Meanwhile, Valeska escalated her pressure. She threatened to expose everything if Nolan didn't act soon. She hinted at talking to Serena herself. Nolan panicked. He told her to stop, to back off, that she was pushing too fast. But Valeska didn't back off. Instead, she came closer. One afternoon, Serena's shop was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but the back door had been forced open, and the flowers she arranged that morning were shredded across the floor. A single photograph was found taped to the counter, one of Nolan holding Valeska's hand. Police took a report, but Serena didn't mention her suspicions. She knew who was behind it, and she knew it wasn't over. At home, tension thickened. Junior began spending more time locked in her room. Bram asked constant questions about why his parents weren't talking. Serena avoided Nolan whenever she could. Nolan, in turn, became paranoid. He checked the locks at night, stared out the windows like someone expecting an intruder, and through it all, Valeska watched. She had inserted herself into the Arkwell family's world like poison in water, slow, quiet, but fatal. She wasn't content to be the woman in the shadows anymore, and what came next would prove that she never intended to be just a secret. The police arrived at the Arkwell residence on a grey October morning after a neighbour, concerned about the family's sudden disappearance, made a call. The house was locked, the mailbox overflowing, and lights had been left on for days. No one had seen Serena open her flower shop. Bram hadn't been to school. Junior had missed art club twice. It was as if the entire family had vanished overnight. Officers entered through the back door, which was oddly ajar despite the bolts being locked from the inside. Inside, the air was heavy and silent, the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a house meant for laughter and life. The kitchen was the first place they checked. The table was still set for breakfast, a half-poured glass of juice sitting untouched, now sour and sticky. The refrigerator door was open, humming loudly, casting a dim blue light on the linoleum floor. And there, crumpled beside the island counter, was Nolan Arkwell. She was lying on her side in a pool of dried blood, her face covered by her own hair. A large kitchen knife had been thrust into her abdomen. The scene was controlled, cold. Not a struggle, not a panic. It looked calculated. Moving upstairs, they found Junior's room in eerie order. Her bed was neatly made, her sketchbook still open on her desk. But something felt wrong. Too clean, too perfect. Then in the bathroom at the end of the hall, they found her. Junior's body was in the tub, fully clothed, her wrists bound tightly with cable ties. The water had long drained out, but her skin had signs of immersion. Her eyes were closed, her face strangely peaceful, as though she had accepted what was coming. Bram's room was untouched, his clothes on the floor like always, his stuffed dinosaur on the pillow. But he was gone. No signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. Just gone. The only clue was a single child's sock near the garage door, one of Bram's navy blue with little stars. And then there was Nolan, or rather, there wasn't. His car was missing from the driveway, his phone was off, his medical bag was gone. There was no sign of where he had gone, but his study showed signs of recent use. A map of the state was spread out on his desk, with certain routes highlighted in yellow. 2 coffee mugs sat beside it. The second one had lipstick on it. Detectives quickly issued a bolo be on the lookout for Nolan Arkwell and his missing son. The working theory was horrifying. The respected doctor had murdered his wife and daughter and fled with his youngest child, but things didn't entirely add up. There was no clear motive, no suicide note, and Nolan had no history of violence. Yet the evidence was damning and time was running out. Late that evening, a call came in from a motel manager in a rural town nearly 50 miles away. A man had checked in the night before under the name R. Dalton, with a young boy who looked scared and unwell. The man paid in cash and seemed confused, asking strange questions about nearby hospitals. Police descended on the location within the hour. The door to the cabin was locked from the inside. When they broke it open, they found Nolan unconscious on the floor, barely breathing, an empty bottle of pills beside him. Bram was found locked in a closet, pale and terrified but alive. Medics revived Nolan and he was taken into custody immediately. The boy was taken to a hospital for evaluation. As the news spread, the entire town of Wexley Heights fell into disbelief. How could the man everyone trusted turn into a monster overnight? But the nightmare had just begun. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear Nolan wasn't alone in the planning or the killing. The second coffee mug, the lipstick, the highlighted maps, and Bram, once stable enough to talk, whispered a name to the detectives that changed the entire case. Valeska. Nolan Arkwell may have held the knife, but someone else had been guiding his hand. Nolan Arkwell awoke in a stark, white hospital room, with his wrists cuffed to the bed. A uniformed officer sat silently in the corner, watching his every breath. News of his arrest had spread like wildfire. Respected surgeon turns family killer. The media painted him as a cold-blooded murderer, a man who traded his perfect life for lust and chaos. But what they didn't know, and what Nolan himself barely understood, was how deeply Valeska Dawn had taken root in his mind. While Nolan was transferred to county jail and charged with double homicide, the investigation into Valeska intensified. Police searched her apartment, a cold, minimalist space with nothing personal on the walls. No photos, no mementos, just rows of books on human anatomy, psychological warfare, and obscure poisons. One bedroom wall was covered in newspaper clippings, most of them about Nolan. His medical awards, his family photos clipped from the local gazette, even a copy of the hospital's internal newsletter featuring his promotion. It was an altar of obsession, not affection. Detectives found a hidden drawer containing disposable phones, burner credit cards, and a notebook filled with disturbing entries. Some were lists of ways to cause harm undetectably. Others were rants about Serena and the children, about how they were obstacles and weak links. In one entry, dated just days before the murders, Valeska wrote, "He's almost ready. But if he won't do it, I will. The ending has already been decided." Police now realize Valeska hadn't just been a mistress. She was a manipulator, possibly a sociopath, and she hadn't disappeared. She had gone into hiding. Back in jail, Nolan underwent psychiatric evaluations. At first he was uncooperative, staring blankly, refusing to speak. But over time, his fragile mental state began to unravel. He spoke of blackouts, of losing time, of voices, Valeska's voice, coaching him through fantasies of escape, urging him to erase the past. He confessed that he didn't remember holding the knife, but he remembered the blood. He remembered Valeska standing there, whispering that it was the only way out. The prosecutors built their case around premeditated murder. They had physical evidence, motive, and confession. But Nolan's defense team began painting a different picture, that of a man suffering from a severe psychological breakdown caused by months of manipulation and emotional abuse. They introduced the idea of folie à deux, a rare psychiatric condition in which one person's delusion is transferred to another. They claimed Nolan had fallen under Valeska's influence so deeply that his mind fractured. Meanwhile, Bram remained in protective custody. The boy was traumatized, speaking little, drawing only in crayon. His pictures were heartbreaking. His family's home burning, a faceless woman holding a knife, a man crying in a bathtub. Each drawing added to the case against both Nolan and Valeska. 3 weeks after the murders, police received an anonymous tip. A woman matching Valeska's description had been spotted at a remote lakeside cabin under the name Eva Wren. The location was traced to a property once owned by her deceased uncle. A SWAT team was dispatched. The cabin was deserted by the time they arrived. But inside, they found more disturbing evidence. A list of new targets, including the district attorney, the lead detective, and even Bram himself. It was clear Valeska hadn't finished her work. She was still operating in the shadows, and she was still dangerous. The trial for Nolan Arkwell began under heavy security and intense public scrutiny. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse daily, some demanding the death penalty, others calling him a victim of a predator's influence. The courtroom was filled with grim silence as photos of Serena and Junior were shown. The prosecutor's voice never cracked, but in the audience, nurses from the hospital wept. So did Junior's art teacher. And as Nolan sat there, his eyes hollow, he asked only one question to his attorney before the trial began. "Do you think she'll come back for me?" No one could answer that, but everyone in the room feared the same thing. Valeska Dawn wasn't done yet. The verdict came after 8 days of emotional testimony, psychiatric evaluations, and hundreds of exhibits that painted a haunting portrait of a once-respected man consumed by darkness. Nolan Arkwell was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of child endangerment. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, life in prison without the possibility of parole. No outbursts, no protests. Nolan simply lowered his head, as if the weight of it all had finally crushed whatever was left inside him. But even with Nolan behind bars, the case refused to fade. Valeska Dawn remained a phantom. Her face was plastered across news broadcasts, and her story had become a nationwide obsession. The FBI had added her to its most wanted list. Tips flooded in from across the country, sightings in bus stations, libraries, airports. None of them led anywhere. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, Bram Arkwell was placed in the care of a foster family trained in trauma counseling. The boy spoke little, but he carried a tattered drawing folded in his pocket everywhere he went. It showed his family standing together under a tree, his mother's hand holding his, Junior smiling beside them, and Nolan drawn smaller, standing apart, shaded in grey. There was no figure of Valeska. When asked, Bram always gave the same answer. She doesn't belong in the picture. In the months that followed, investigators uncovered more about Valeska's past. Her real name was not Valeska Dawn. She had changed identities 3 times over the last decade, each time embedding herself into small towns, always around hospitals or schools. She had been questioned in 2 previous suspicious deaths, both ruled as suicide at the time. But now seen through new eyes, the cases were being reopened. It was becoming clear she had a pattern: attach herself to powerful men, break their lives apart from the inside, and vanish just before everything exploded. Break came when a retired nurse from a hospital in Oregon recognized her from a news report. She remembered the woman not as Valeska, but as Rena, a temp who left after a fellow staff member died under mysterious circumstances. This sent federal agents to Oregon, where they found a storage unit under her alias. Inside were journals, wigs, forged IDs, and surveillance photos of people who had no idea they'd been watched. Most chilling was a collection of children's toys, still in packaging, labeled with names. One of the tags read Bram. The evidence was terrifying. Valeska hadn't been targeting Nolan by accident. She had studied him, chosen him. She wanted a man with a perfect life, a respected name, and a family worth destroying. And she had succeeded almost. Then, nearly 6 months after the murders, a small-town librarian in Vermont reported a strange incident. A woman had visited the library late at night, asking for books on child development and trauma healing. She used a fake name but paid in cash for a lost book fee, and when the librarian watched the security footage later, she was struck by the woman's stare. It was Valeska, no doubt. By the time authorities arrived, she was gone again. But she had left something behind, a library card application filled out in shaky handwriting. At the bottom, she had scrawled something in the comment box. He was never supposed to survive. The case remains open. Valeska Dawn, or whoever she really is, remains a ghost. One step ahead, always watching, always planning. Nolan Arkwell rots in prison, broken and forgotten by the town that once admired him. And Bram, now a young boy growing older in silence, carries the scars of a story the world still struggles to understand. They say evil sometimes wears the face of love, but in this case, it wore a stranger's smile, knocked softly on the back, door of a family's perfect life, and tore it apart forever.